Welcome to the Fright Lab. I'm Lucas Yoakum, and with me tonight, as always, is Joseph Wren. Tonight's episode, Nosferatu by F.W. Murnau, 1922. Before we go any further, you might have noticed that we have a new theme song. This is from the Sisters of Black Mountain, and the song is called Spirit Board. The Sisters of Black Mountain are a Los Angeles-based band that answers a question that I know has been bothering us all, and that question is, what if the mamas and papas had a love child with Fabio Frizzi, and that child was baptized by Papa Perpetua of Ghost? Cecilia, the lead vocalist and band leader for the Sisters of Black Mountain, has very graciously agreed to let Joe and I use two of their songs in our show. Now, because they have been so kind to us, that means you, siblings, need to head over to sistersofblackmountain.bandcamp.com and pick up their songs. You can also give them support by checking them out on YouTube or wherever you get your music. Please give them a share as well on all of your social media platforms of choice. We're really looking forward to hearing what they have going on into the future, and we're hoping to have a longer relationship with them. So, with that out of the way, with that bookkeeping done, on with the show.
Devices are in place, the spirit name is still unknown. The magic has begun, the ocular apparition. Devices are in place, the spirit name is still unknown. The magic has begun, the ocular apparition. Spirit board is here, what tonight goodbye. Spirit board is to know, could it be Black Star? Spirit board is here, what tonight goodbye. Spirit board is to know, could it be Black Star?
Vampires are one of the most recurring motifs in horror media. We've never gotten over our need to discuss how seeming human-on-human predation is something we are always going to talk about. In a sense, a vampire can be a serial killer, or a purely predatory animal, or a seducer, sometimes all at once. But the myths of vampirism are ancient and often much darker than even the best horror films, or the worst moments of the subspecies canon. Very few vampire movies explore the less than erotic sides of vampirism more than the absolutely seminal piece of early horror, that is to say, 1922's Nosferatu, a symphony of horror, directed by F.W. Murnau. Even after a century plus, this film wields a dark power and has a shadow that looms large over cinema. But in reality, Nosferatu is also a film that shouldn't exist. By that rationale, its two more noteworthy reinterpretations shouldn't exist either. I am, of course, referring to Nosferatu the Vampire from 1979, directed by Werner Herzog, and 2024 Robert Eggers' Nosferatu. And fear not, siblings, those two are getting episodes of their own sometime after this episode. In our normal fashion, let's ask a few questions. For instance, number one, what is a Nosferatu? 2, how did this film survive near total destruction? And 3, how does Nosferatu have such a lasting power? And now, follow us into the darkest heart of early cinema as we talk about one of the finest foundations of modern horror. When you're talking about early cinema, it's tempting to want to say the early geniuses of cinema, like the first films that we start talking about, the classics. You immediately go to kind of the golden age of Hollywood, right? Right after the talkies, into the 1950s when glitz and glamour meant glitz and glamour. You have to go back to this kind of pre-war era, after Georges Méliès's things like Journey to the Moon, and into the Expressionist period, the stuff right before World War I really even begins to kick off. Specifically, the artist that comes to mind most for me when I think about these early cinematic geniuses is F.W. Murnau. A lot of Murnau's early filmography is still available, though, outside of the early lost stuff. So movies like Phantom, Faust, and Sunrise, A Song of Two Humans, these are all widely available, and they are actually gorgeous, especially Sunrise. If you've never seen it, really go give it a watch. It's really a beautiful film. They're widely available and you can find them streaming in a lot of places. Most of it by now is public domain or will be public domain soon if it's not already. So it's available and it's out there. And if you're looking for a cinematic education, Murnau's early work is a great place to start. Unfortunately, though, his career was really, really short. He died, sadly, in a car accident in California in 1931. And it's always struck me as a pretty incredible tragedy that he died as young as he did, because I've got to wonder what a post-war Murnau would have been like. He was still a young man when he passed away. So I wonder how a much older and much more mature Murnau would have reacted, what a post-World War II kind of film would have looked like. He had obviously long emigrated to the United States before World War II even really kicked off in earnest.
He's also one of the few names I can actually name in the earliest of filmmaking eras.
Right.
Nosferatu is often compared to, visually speaking, to The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari and other early surreal films that I think we're going to get into, talking about how the visual medium of film had no rules. So it takes this early view of it that Murnau's clearly above and beyond. One of the examples of how can I take something that's brand new and do something that is truly unique with it? Even before films had sound or synchronized voices, talking pictures, as it were.
Yeah.
All you had was the visual. Eventually, it's going to turn into, for a while, we're just filming a stage performance. We're just filming a play. And as much as I love that, as much as I love those classic films and those musicals and those tap dance extravaganzas, I do have a soft spot for films like this that had to do something new. And what would he have done alongside someone like a Hitchcock?
Right, exactly. I mean, and Hitchcock got his start in the silent era as well, but I don't know the exact timeline. It's a place where, admittedly, my knowledge of film is a little fuzzy, is the early silent era. I don't know if Hitchcock's earliest silent works are fully contemporaneous to Murnau or are shortly after he kind of reached the height of his skill. And, I'll talk about it more at length later because it relates to a conversation we've had before. Murnau didn't just do it well. He kind of did it first. And his passing is, it's one of those great what ifs, one of those great counterfactuals. Could there have been a Hitchcock without Murnau? We can't ever answer that exactly. And it's a real shame. And in a weird kind of, epilogue to the life of Murnau, in 2015, someone broke into his tomb in Germany and stole his fucking skull. Why? Don't get me wrong.
That's horrible, by the way.
It's horrible. No. Let's get this out of the way. Maybe this is maybe 80 episodes in, we have to put this tagline in: don't desecrate graves. The Fright Lab, Lucas and Joe from the Fright Lab say, don't desecrate grave sites, you fucking freaks. I know none of our fans are going to go do that. I am not worried about that. But hey, maybe leave cemeteries alone. Let's just go there. But yeah, in 2015, someone broke into his tomb and stole his skull. The perpetrator has never not to this day, or to my knowledge, ever been identified and tracked down. And I get it. There is a very black metal part of my personality that says, yeah, fuck yeah, F.W. Murnau's skull. But no, really, like, why? I mean, I hate to say it. It's kind of appropriate. Like, if you're going to be the guy who created Faust and Nosferatu as films, sure, I guess that's kind of appropriate in some terrible way. But also at the same time, listen, if you are responsible for breaking into Murnau's grave in 2015 and stealing his skull, you need to reach out to us at thefrightlabpodcast@gmail.com and let us know why the fuck you did that and how we can get it back to German authorities, you freak. Anyway, right, so Murnau he is kind of the guy who made it happen. And 1922 Germany, specifically cities like Berlin, things were about to get very, very weird and very, very ugly, and World War I being freshly around the bend, something that was very much on the minds of people. It's hard to think about horror and not think how different, again, a medium might be or a genre might be without these truly awful events. And again, a post-World War II Murnau, I think, would be even weirder. And I wonder if it would drive him to make films that were somehow darker than Nosferatu, or if the true awfulness of World War II would make him go, yeah, fuck it, I'm going to keep making movies like Sunrise that are actually beautiful. I don't know. It's hard to say. So a little earlier, I pointed out that Nosferatu is a film that shouldn't exist. Well, to understand how that is, or why that fact exists, we need to talk about the structure of Nosferatu, the film, and more specifically, the actual writing of the film. So I'm going to guess most of our fans are very intimately aware of this little book by a guy named Bram Stoker called Dracula, and that the book Dracula has inspired almost the entirety of the modern vampire genre. And if it's not the entire inspiration, it's a massive cross-section of that inspiration. And I don't honestly know off the top of my head how many different adaptations of Dracula have existed. I'm going to guess it's way more than I could even begin to know. But Nosferatu was kind of the first. And specifically is that like 90% of the plot beats of the film Nosferatu are just Dracula. Long story short, a man goes to a faraway country to seal a deal with an eccentric count who turns out to be a vampire, and it seals the doom of everyone in his life. Long story short. When Nosferatu was being written, the names were changed by Murnau and company. So, Jonathan Harker becomes Hutter, Dracula becomes Orlok, Renfield becomes Canuck, and so on. The names changed and some of the behavior changed, but by and large, the film Nosferatu, if you know Dracula, you know Nosferatu. It's actually, if you're not aware of that, as I was not, the first time I watched Nosferatu, I was my early teens, I think, early to mid-teens. I didn't really know. I just knew it was this classic scary vampire movie. And then I watched it and went, well, that's Dracula. That's just Dracula. And don't get me wrong, I really enjoyed it, but it was very much I don't know what I expected. It certainly wasn't this.
I think this might be the first silent film I ever intentionally sought out, and I guarantee it was one of many copies of a copy that was probably on the Internet Archive, because obviously at the time, if it wasn't lost, it was public domain, so easily found. But comparing it to what would come later, there was something different about it. Then again, at the time, I hadn't read the novel.
Okay, so you went into Nosferatu not like, I'm sure you kind of knew the plot beats of Dracula and things like that because you're a horror fan, but you didn't really know the structure of the novel in a way that would make any sense.
Correct. At the time, I would say, have I seen the original Universal Dracula? Yes. Had I seen the Hammer films? Yes. I had not seen the Spanish language Dracula that was made alongside the original Universal film. And at the time, I would say everything that is common knowledge about vampires might have started with Dracula, but was probably blown way out of proportion by Anne Rice in the Vampire Chronicles. That was my position at the time.
Yeah. And the thing that I really like that Nosferatu does is that it does introduce a couple of weird twists into the story. Most notably, like probably the most well-known thing that they add into it is this element of the plague, which we're going to talk a little bit more about plague and vampire stuff later on between this and the other episodes we'll eventually do on Nosferatu. So, the addition of the plague and, kind of altering some characters ever so slightly, describing Nosferatu as just a ripoff of Dracula is maybe not correct. You could argue that it's technically it's an adaptation of Dracula that is playing with the source material a little bit, but I've heard more than one person say, Nosferatu is just a ripoff of Dracula. And I get it. I totally understand where you would come from. But the person who didn't agree with that and didn't see where they were coming from was Florence Stoker. Specifically, that's Bram Stoker's widow. She sued over copyright. And not only did she sue over copyright, Murnau and company, she sued the hell out of them. She won, and the film was ordered to be totally destroyed.
Wow. A different time, right?
Right, exactly. And, well, fate seemed to have had some other ideas about that. There is one thing that we can always count upon in an era where there was only physical media, where there were no digital copies. Certain things only exist because of weird quirks of fate. There's movies like London After Midnight, which was a vampire movie that never was finished, had Lon Chaney Sr. Some stills exist of it. They're still around, but we don't really know much about the movie. And it's kind of a shame because the stills that exist are flippin' terrifying. And I would love to know what was actually in that film. We'll never know. Nosferatu, on the other hand, there was a lot of copies lying around that for whatever reason weren't swept up and destroyed. Over the years, many people began cobbling the film together from all of these different work prints and came up with the full-length film. Now, the one that I recommend, the version of Nosferatu I recommend you go seek out if you haven't seen it before now, is put up by Kino Classics. It's made in conjunction with the Murnau estate. It is lovingly done. It is beautifully done, in fact, especially if you can get one that's been digitally remastered. It looks gorgeous, and it lacks the kind of ugly smudginess that so many second and third generation copies will end up having. There's a few that have been uploaded to YouTube. Again, it is public domain at this point, so you can watch it more or less anywhere. There's also the Internet Archive has at least a couple of different versions. Most of them are pretty good. I just like the one with the original score, personally. I know Joe has some feelings about the scores being used, but the better copy you can get, well, the better. It just looks good. So, I will say this is, there's a connection here, right? Like, it's kind of funny. A film about an undead character, though it's never expressly said that Nosferatu, that Count Orlok is an undead thing. He's in a freaking coffin, man. Come on, he's undead. There is something kind of funny, right? About this force that just refuses to die, and a century later, we're still making versions of this film. It says something about the movie, though, right? There is something deeply weird about this movie that it almost feels a little evil, even though it's pretty much a film of the early 1900s. It reflects a certain moralism and a certain worldview. So. I know you wanted to talk about the original score a bit, Joe, because we talked about this earlier. It's really good, but go on with it.
A little bit, because I have not sat and watched the Kino Classics version yet. It is 100% on my list as part of this series. We're going to get into that a little bit more. But this idea that a silent film had a score that was intended to be performed when it was viewed. We didn't have sound recordings with our moving pictures yet. We didn't have that. There was no way to reproduce that at the time. So this idea that we have fundamentally preserved the director's original vision and we can experience that today, I'll be honest with you, Lucas, I want to see that in a theater to fully appreciate it, because I don't know how many people at the time even had the opportunity to see it in a theater that way. You would have had to have a full orchestra and the film screen or a really bad record player.
Well, and we only know a little bit about the original score, like what we have available. And again, right now you could pause this episode and go on YouTube and look it up. For the record, I would like for you to finish this episode before you do that. But you could go right now and listen to the fragments of it. The Kino Classics version, I believe, uses the majority of the extant score. It is still attached to that. But I've also seen a lot of different versions of Nosferatu. Same film, but with just different scores. Some are better than others. Everyone is going to be, have their own personal taste. The one that I remember the most vividly, though, and Joe will appreciate this, years ago, someone gave me a copy of Nosferatu with the score replaced with a bunch of typo negative songs. And for some reason, this DVD has an introduction by David Carradine. And David Carradine had kind of a spooky voice, but I don't really know where they were going with that. It's a weird DVD, and I know there are copies floating around. You could probably find some on eBay right now. It's very, very silly. And if you can find it, if you're a typo negative fan and you like Nosferatu, which there's like a non-zero chance that, one, you're listening to the Fright Lab, there's a chance you're a typo negative fan. But also there's a chance that you like vampire movies, you probably like typo negative.
I have a feeling we're going to be talking about typo negative on discography discussion at some point in the very near future, by the way.
Oh, boy.
Spoilers.
Oh, boy. I like typo, but I'm not a super typo fan.
When I think about silent films, though, the way they've been largely distributed over the years is one of two ways. It's either a DVD version with a generic classical music score, or someone has tried to reinvent the wheel. I know the first version of Nosferatu I had to watch, according to my friends, was the dark ambient version. And don't get me wrong, it fits.
Sure.
But it never feels like it was made with that in mind. So those things are cool. I think for me, I just watched the movie and, another film we've talked about, Haxan. The version that I saw first with the generic classical music score is fine, because I know that the film as a whole didn't have music or a soundtrack or spoken words to really drive the feeling home. 100% of what scares you about Nosferatu was the screen. So how do we get back to a silent film that has a score the way that this film at least partially does today through the preservation efforts? I don't know. The closest I have ever come to understanding how these films were originally viewed was asking my grandfather. And he told me that it depended on what movie you saw and what theater it was and who was working that night. You could have everything from a Tin Pan Alley piano to just the St. Louis Symphony just sitting there playing some music, so you'd have a string section doing something. So it wasn't improvisational. But we have to remember that there is a time. Someone saw this for the first time. It didn't matter what the soundtrack was. They were scared to death by the visuals on the screen.
Yeah, it's hard to talk about those early things, right? One of the things I remember hearing about in a college course I took on the history of film was how early films really freaked people out. Yeah, you had magic lantern shows from the medieval era onwards, and you had different people have been playing with light and shadow and things like that for a long time, but moving pictures, cinemas, the cinematograph, these were...
Bravo, sir.
I'm very good at this. We forget that this was at one point in time the height of visual technology. Now, what's interesting, though, and this is something we talked about in our episode with Professor Greg Semenza from University of Connecticut, that horror has been with us a long time, and so many of the earliest films are horror films. We were talking a little earlier about Georges Méliès. So many of our early films were playing with horror and playing around with just the potential of what you could do with the camera, being able to start and stop time, being able to insert stuff through splicing in stuff through the lens or whatever. There are so many ways that horror became so prevalent. I have to imagine you're a woman in Berlin who's out on a date with her husband or whatever, and he says, we don't get a chance to go see any films very often. which for them would have been like, there's been like 10 years where they could do that. And he says, what about this Nosferatu? I hear it's very spooky. And they go, and no doubt someone, husband or wife, probably wet their pants that night, because there are scenes in that film that literally no one before this point had seen in real life, right? And that's one of those things that as a horror fan, something that I really enjoy is being able to see people have that reaction. I've seen enough horror movies that I can kind of predict stuff that happens in horror. Now, when a movie comes along and throws you a real curveball, that's always fun. But I love being in the room with people when they see a horror movie for the first time that you know really intimately. Even seeing Nosferatu with a room full of friends, the first time he comes out of that coffin, wow.
Yeah.
It's so good. People aren't like flying out of their chairs the way they have been with more modern horror films. No one is doing the Terrifier Art the Clown puking in a bag thing, but it is kind of a, wow, that's so scary.
The technical wizardry fan in me immediately went into, how did they do that?
Yes.
At the time on film, how did they do that?
Yes, exactly. It's so hard to ignore. It's just so hard to ignore.
Have you opened the door with Nosferatu that we can actually talk about the golem at some point?
Man, I have been very unfamiliar with the Golem films, Der Golem. I've been very unfamiliar with those until recently. A couple of months ago, I got to see, I think it's the first of the Der Golem films. Der Golem, How He Came Into the World, I believe is the name of it. It's translated from German, and my German is not as good as it should be. I've seen it, and it's it is very clearly a lot of hangovers from the theater, but it's still really, really good. And I would love to talk about just German expressionist cinema broadly. I am not quite sharp enough to do that just yet. I feel like I will eventually broach that subject because it's so important to horror. But their Golem films are really, really interesting anyway, and I think they are worth bringing up at some point kind of in depth. I don't know enough about them to talk about them meaningfully. But having seen a little bit of it, you can see that there was something in the air. There was something going on in the culture that this sort of very atmospheric, weird horror was very appropriate somehow. The less we say, the better about post-World War I, pre-World War II Germany. The less we say about that here, the better. It's too deep and too weird of a subject, and I don't know enough to talk about it in any sort of authoritative way. So, but no, I mean, definitely Der Golem films will need to be brought up at some point as a kind of history of horror, because they are so important to this genre, especially in terms of makeup effects between Count Orlok being portrayed by Max Schreck and the actor who originally played Der Golem, Paul Wegener. The makeup effects for the time are so interesting and so inventive, because here again, there was no alternative. You had to be inventive and make them work. One of the things that, as I was watching this film and beginning to do some kind of preliminary research to kind of understand the film, was the word Nosferatu. What the fuck is a Nosferatu? So, to the best of my abilities, I've been digging through as many articles or stories or whatever I could find, and it seems like no one actually knows the exact etymology or history of the word Nosferatu. It shows up primarily in Romanian sources, typically referring to undead creatures or sometimes just directly vampires. Now, I found an article on sci-fi.com, which is, if you're a horror fan, a shockingly good resource for kind of broad bases of information. A quote from an article, which will be included in the show notes. Nosferatu is not the name of a character, but rather an archaic Romanian word for a vampire, potentially derived from another older Romanian word, Nesufritu, meaning the offensive one. And I think that's so interesting because we want to immediately assume it must mean like bloodsucker or something. But no, there's this idea of the dead being kind of unclean or something about them being offensive to life that I really like. And it's an interesting thing.
Or a demon or the devil.
Yeah, and folklore like really varies culture to culture. But for some reason, there seems to be many cultures that have this blood-sucking monster in their stories, as well as just generally the undead. Along many tropes, folkloric and mythological distinctions we have today, the way we talk about them are modern. If we're going to say, well, no, Nosferatu's only come from Romania, but Upir only that the rules that we have don't really exist in the old world. It's kind of like when you get into talking about very specific pieces of like tools. I'm a martial arts nerd. So when you talk about like, oh, well, the Polish use a type of sword called the zabla. Well, in the Polish language, the word zabla means like sword or saber. It's not that they used a weapon called a zabla. They used a sword and it was called zabla because that's the word for sword. The rules that we have today, yeah, they help, they're a helpful nomenclature, but they are not the rules themselves. Officially, that might be the nerdiest thing I've ever talked about on this show. Wow.
I'm going to give you a little extra here. It's interesting to me that the word may literally translate to the offensive one, because one of the visuals that always stands out to me after reading and seeing the film Sin City, Frank Miller's character of the Yellow Bastard is described to be the offensive one, not just in what he does, but also like his smell and his skin being this just vile shade of yellow that to me is very reminiscent of a character like Count Orlok or the portrayal that Max Schreck has in this film. It's a very Gollum-esque looking character, a very little demonic little looking character where it's not a specific depiction, but it's a generalization of whatever that is. I don't like it.
When we're dealing with a lot of the monsters of the past, a lot of what you might think of as like folkloric kind of creatures, very often they are just this kind of, they're either this nebulous kind of evil thing, this kind of nebulous evil force, or they're viewed as somehow still rooted to the material. Like in Eastern Europe, vampires were viewed as this especially ruinous form of the undead. They heralded all sorts of just terrible things up to and including the plague. Or coincidentally, if you died of the plague, you might be accused of also becoming a vampire ex post facto. And there was such a concern for these sorts of vile creatures, these yellow bastards, which I realize now sounds a little weird. I'm referring to the Sin City character as kind of archetypically related to Count Orlok. They were viewed as so awful that they would have to be treated a special way once you discovered that they existed. It's bad enough that you died in some, tragic or sad or violent way. But now they think, oh, for some reason, now Lucas is dead and now he's risen from the grave. So a lot of places would have traditions of how to deal with potentially the undead. There's this idea of vampire graves that pops up pretty much all over Europe, where you will find graves where the dead have their jaw kind of broken and stones shoved into their mouth so that they can't bite down anymore.
Wow.
Or like bodies that are secured into the bed in a weird way, like face down or kind of pinned down. And my personal favorite, just because it's just the most intense, you would find certain graves where they would have the blade of a sickle over the throat of the cadaver so that if they did rise from their grave, they would have a bit of an insurance policy in the form of self-decapitation, which is, I don't know, it's just kind of metal. Something about a sickle across the throat is just intense. I really think that's really interesting.
So at some point, the coroner comes in and says, "Is this the body?" "Yes." "And you have it secured to the bottom of the casket?" "Yes." "All right. Have you considered what we might do if he wakes up?" "Well, we were thinking about mounting this very sharp blade to prevent any sort of vertical rising. Can we just take the head off now, though, and save ourselves the blade? I mean, those blades are expensive." "No, we can't do that because that might be offensive to someone."
I never thought about that. Sickle blades probably weren't cheap back then. Like, you really had to be pretty serious about this whole vampire thing if you were like, Bob's in that grave, and this is really worrisome. Like, we're worried that he's raising up to hurt his family. You know what would fix his ass, right? But you had to be pretty sure that it was Bob, right?
I'm getting a witch trial vibe from this. Like, what happens if she floats? She's a witch. What happens if she sinks? She's dead, but she's not a witch. Well, if she's gonna die one way or the other, I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying this seems like a flawed logic. Like, there's a flaw in here somewhere, I guess is what I'm saying.
I mean, yeah, it is flawed because, the point I want to make here, because I'm glad you brought that up, this kind of flawed, like, folklore logic, because whenever you read either myths from other cultures or just, like, general folklore stuff, throwing salt over your shoulder after you break a mirror or whatever superstition you have, there's always this level of like, well, that's dumb. Why are we doing that? It's so deep into the culture, right? It's so deep into the DNA of a particular thing that you kind of can't extract it outside of its original context. And it's one of the reasons I think the vampire myth popping up across national and cultural boundaries is so interesting. Because there was a fear of the unclean dead. There was a fear of the dead not given proper burial rites or correct treatment after shuffling off the mortal coil, or the thought that, yeah, well, this soul is gone, but the body still keeps getting up for some reason. There was an understanding that life and death is a lot stranger than you might imagine, and that there are these apocryphal stories of people being put in a casket because they, we think she's dead, she's passed on, and them waking up from a deep coma as they're getting ready to be buried, or worse, the fear of being buried alive. I think there's this tendency that we want to believe that we are past the point of putting sickles over the necks of the dead. But stuff we'll talk about in some other episodes and just some other theories I have down the line will kind of, I think, maybe disprove that. But at the same time, though, I think it says something about culture, right? Is that you're in a village and you believe that the person who died recently may be coming back. Yeah, sure, that's superstitious, and we want to kind of put our noses in the air at that. But in reality, this is also a kind of weirdly scientific thinking. These are people who are coming up with ways of saying there is something wrong with the world right now. We can only put together so much data because we only have so much data. Why is this happening? Let's try to fix it. Did decapitating your neighbor's corpse really help Bobby who caught pneumonia? Probably not. I'm going to guess that didn't actually fix it. Maybe. And I'm not saying that to be shitty. I don't think that fixed it, man. But I get the thought and I get the understanding, and it's the thing we've got to also remember is that so much of what we assume to be this is just scientific fact. We know that certain chemicals do certain things. We know the sun does certain things certain times of the day. All of that had to come from somewhere, and disentangling mythology from science, disentangling the mystical from the scientific, it's a long process. And if you've spent 5 minutes on the internet, people are just as prone to superstition and mystical thinking today as they were 400 years ago. It didn't stop when we stopped believing in vampires and witches. In our conversation with Professor Greg Semenza, we kind of got into this thing about Nosferatu giving us the early text, the kind of text that we would be able to talk about horror for the rest of our lives with. Because in a lot of ways, watching Nosferatu, even though it's, a little over a century old at the time of this recording, is very refreshing because you watch it expecting it to be some weird pre-modern slog. And it's not. It's not any longer than any major film you've watched in the last 5 years. It is breezy and interesting and visually keeps moving. Sure, some of the special effects are a little weird and it's definitely dated. It is not a modern looking film in any regard, but it's not supposed to be. It is very much a thing of its time. But watching it feels like you're watching a modern horror film because basically every modern horror film on some level is fully indebted to the 1922 Nosferatu. Visually, the film is still really, really striking and feels incredibly eerie now, and that's even without Max Schreck as Count Orlok on the screen. Even though, let's just talk for a quick second about how incredible his visual appearance is. And, there's always been some ugly rumors about what they were trying to get at with him being kind of insectoid or rodent-like. I don't necessarily think that's what the director and his team were after, but his appearance is absolutely horror iconic. I mean, so much so, again, that it's helped inspire dozens of vampire films after the fact. The Nosferatu archetype, let's say, the Orlok archetype, shows up constantly throughout vampire media going forward. It is now unavoidable. But even without him on screen, there's just a lot of moments in that film that are either beautiful or just kind of horrific and hard to explain. And that's the thing about the movie. It feels inexplicable somehow. Like it just doesn't even feel like it should exist. It feels totally out of time. And when you get down to it, I think it is one of the darkest visions of a vampire in a long time. I mean, definitely movies like 30 Days of Night, they're way more violent and way more gruesome and way scarier in an immediate way than Nosferatu. But there's no 30 Days of Night without Nosferatu. It is the darkest kind of vision of the whole thing. So the question becomes, does it still hold up? And I guess you can kind of already tell. The answer for me is yeah. There is an element of it that I think modern audiences will struggle with. If you've never seen Nosferatu before now and you're thinking, wow, Lucas and Joe have really talked big about this movie. If you're thinking now is the time that I want to go see it, yeah, now is the time to go see it. It holds up. And the iconic sequences that you're thinking of, you need to see them in context. Now, it is early cinema. Even though it feels mostly like a modern film, it is still older than us, and it is an ancient thing in cinema terms. So it can be a little alienating. There is stuff that feels weird that I don't think modern directors would do now. But again, all of modern horror's DNA is in Nosferatu, or at least originates from Nosferatu. So if you're looking for a good historical understanding of horror, this is the place to start. This is a wonderful place to begin any horror voyage, especially vampire media, if that's what you're into.
Saying that this is where horror comes from in the modern sense, the way filmmaking has evolved over time, it is certainly the beginning. It is the immediate start to what would be horror in film. But I don't think you can really point to it with as much credit as you're giving it right now.
Okay, interesting.
Here's why. When you said earlier that this film shouldn't have existed, it was sued out of existence by the Stoker estate. I don't know the dates on that, but there certainly would have been a time frame where it was either shown because somebody didn't know they weren't supposed to show it, or there wasn't really anybody to tell on the theater for showing the film, right?
Sure.
So somebody had a print of this somewhere. The right people saw it and were able to copy the elements into future films. I truly think what we think of as modern horror really comes down to the Universal Monsters collection. I truly think what we think of as modern depictions of vampires and spooky creatures really does come down to what was done in the Universal films. At least that's what Hollywood wants me to think.
Sure.
There are aspects of filmmaking in Nosferatu that are in other films, just in other countries. We had this little side tangent earlier about Der Golem. So the filmmaking was out there, but this was still new. It was a new medium. We had to figure out how this works in order to make the moving pictures make sense to us. So when I think about Nosferatu, I don't think everything comes from here. But I do think this is the genesis of it that we need to look back and say, there are pieces of this everywhere else. This was just the first time they were all put together. So it's that argument about you give two programmers the same problem, they're going to come up with the same solution. So why are we copywriting the solution? And that's a bad example with this, but I'm more talking about filmmaking as a whole, not necessarily the story. I think you would have had this influence even if they had permission to make the film in the first place. You still would have gotten to the end result. I just don't know that this film gets all the credit because there was so much time where it couldn't be seen.
I see your point. And it does bring up something I've been thinking about a lot in terms of art and artistic media. The world wars, shall we say, were bad. They really ruined a lot of the world, and we lost a lot across the globe, right? There are probably whole sections of culture from multiple countries that are just gone. Pieces of art, stories to be told. I know, thinking about it from my martial arts nerd headspace, there's a lot of martial arts stuff that got lost in World War II because the people who were responsible for maintaining it died. It becomes an issue, right? And this is the problem with those sorts of disasters, those sorts of great calamities. There is a level where we lose so much when there's these great disasters, but also just kind of history writ broad, right? There's so much we don't know about the ancient world that we're still learning. I do find stuff about, archaeology and paleontology to be really interesting because it is revealing that we are learning more and more about the evolution of animals and of humans year after year. More data, albeit slowly, is coming to light constantly, and our view of the past is getting more nuanced, bigger, thicker. Boy, that could have gone in a weird direction. But the volume, if we were going to call it a volume of human history, is now a very thick text. Art moves in much the same way. And I think that something like Nosferatu now is very emblematic of that. Like, yeah, I agree with your point. It is, drips and drops of Nosferatu are probably in all horror, but there are actually tons of horror films that we don't know anything about. There's probably a few that we don't even know the titles of. Like, we don't know that we lost it. We don't know that we don't know at this point. And that's a shame. And I would love to see all of that stuff. Again, I always have this hope that one day we're going to see some working copy or some greater fragment of London After Midnight, because I want to know. I want to know what was there. And if we never see it, you kind of have to just live comfortably with knowing that it's never going to be there and that you can't ever access that part of the past. It sucks, but it is there. And yeah, maybe there are whole other horror films that were happening contemporaneous to Nosferatu that we really don't know much about or don't know about at all, or productions that started that failed because the economy sucked and everything was bad. There is so much that we don't know. But what we do know is so illustrative at this point. And ultimately, compared to, painting, cinema is a very new art when you get right down to it. In the same way that photography, even though it's so different now than it was at its inception, it's still pretty young in human terms. That I always just hope that one day we're going to find more of this connective tissue, more of this DNA to tell us what we don't know about horror. That's just me, though, and I could be wrong about this. I suspect that as time progresses, we're going to find more and more about this phenomenon. And who knows, maybe new work prints of Nosferatu will show up in someone's attic someday. Likely? Nah, probably not, but you never know. And maybe the day will come when we get to point to some other film and go, this, Danish movie that only had 4 prints of it. Oh man, watching it, you see so much of the rest of European horror. I get it now. Maybe not. That's hard to say. But, because it's hard to say, it leaves a lot of room for conjecture. It leaves a lot of room for conversation. Specifically, questions. Questions like, what do you think? Is Nosferatu the early genetic progenitor of all of horror movies? Is Count Orlok the weirdest, creepiest, and grossest of all vampires? Or am I, as always, talking way too much about a subject I only partially understand? Whatever you think of these questions, you should let us know. And you can let us know by reaching out to us at thefrightlabpodcast@gmail.com. We can be found on all social media platforms. If you're still into that kind of thing for whatever, most of the time you can just look us up, Fright_Lab_pod, or simply The Fright Lab. We have been doing a lot of really good work recently via Threads and Instagram. We've been connecting with a lot of fans. There's a lot of directors who we've been talking to who are doing really, really fucking cool indie stuff that we're going to talk about in the next few episodes that I'm so excited about where horror is right now and where the world is going in terms of this media. I know things are hard all over the world, but man, horror media is just getting better and better all the time. But Joe, there's some things that I need you to help me clean up here specifically. First of all, if you're wanting to help us continue making this show, which we're going to keep doing no matter what, but it'll be easier if you guys reach out to us via Patreon. Joe, can you tell our fans about Patreon?
Patreon.com/The Fright Lab. Links will be in the show notes. You heard Lucas say it. If you want to contribute to the making and the ongoing life of this podcast and other ideas we may have in the works that are just not quite ready to come to the surface, Patreon.com/The Fright Lab is where you can help us out, and we appreciate everyone for listening to this show. And if you want to keep this conversation going, you heard Lucas say it. We are on your social media platform of choice. The one place he didn't tell you about, Discord. That is discord.thefrightlab.com. Links will be in the show notes. That is where this conversation will continue and where we want to hear from you. If you are a fan of all things heavy metal, you need to be listening to all the podcasts we are creating at discussmetal.com. We talk about your favorite bands, my favorite bands. What I need you to do right now is take out your phone. Scroll to the left, scroll to the right. Find the place where you can give this show a thumbs up or a 5-star review and help us out. It lets us know you're listening, and it lets us hear from you. Lucas, will you tell everyone how much we appreciate independent artists and independent media?
Independent music, independent art, independent media. I don't know if you've noticed yet, but it's kind of our bag. It's the thing that we're obsessed with. It's the thing that we're hunting down. Yeah, we talk about a lot of big name movies. We just spent a long time talking about one of the most famous horror movies of all time. But I am convinced that all of the best media that's going to come out in the next 10 years is going to be from independent sources. It's going to be from new directors trying something out, taking a wild swing, or it's going to be musicians doing something new or wild or different or just really, really good. We believe in independent music, we believe in independent art, and we believe in independent horror. So if you are listening right now and you're thinking, well, I've got a cool independent horror project, be that a new short film, a new feature-length film, a TV pitch you're putting out there right now, some weird next-level dark ambient shit, or some sort of weird horror music, maybe like the Sisters of Black Mountain, which we'll talk about them in here in a second. If you have some horror-related project and you'd like to see it get some bandwidth, reach out to us on any of our platforms. We are happy to hear from you, and we will happily talk about your projects. One last time, however, I want to give a special thanks to the Sisters of Black Mountain for letting us use 2 of their songs. You're going to hear another one of their song here in just a moment. They have been so incredibly gracious with us, and their music is so much fun. Again, I encourage you to visit their Bandcamp and download all of their music right now and make them mega famous. They deserve it. It's going to be a good time working with them in the future. With that, as always, The Fright Lab is written and researched by me, Lucas Yoakum, and is edited and beaten into shape by the one and only Joseph Wren, my intrepid co-host and producer. We appreciate each and every one of you, and we will talk to you all again very, very soon.
That's Fright Lab for you.
Here comes the one that you've been calling. Here comes the one that you've been waiting for. Look down, all of the things are falling at your feet. And when you hear the voice that's calling, the glowing of the morning star, it's everything that you've been wanting. When the morning comes, this is a different kind of energy, a different kind of love, the kind that burns you up inside, makes you feel alive. This things are falling at your feet. You're feeling like a major goddess. You're feeling like the queen of hell. And everything you ever wanted at your reach. This is a different kind of energy, a different kind of love, the kind that burns you up inside, makes you feel alive. This is a different kind of energy, a different kind of love, the kind that wakes you up at night till the morning light. And when you hear the voice that's calling, the glowing of the morning star, it's everything that you've been wanting. When the morning comes, your senses heighten at the hour. When